Welcome to this month's installment of Creation Justice webinars. This is the place where we focus on some of the most critical issues facing our world today so that we might not only grow in awareness, but grow in action that makes love visible. I am Brooks Barrett. I'm the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. As always, I am joined by that trailblazer for justice out of Birmingham, Alabama, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, who is the Executive Director for Alabama Interfaith Power and Light and the People's Justice Council. Michael, we have a lineup today of some of the most climate justice, climate policy, climate movement, high IQ people in the world. So I'm ready to take notes on this webinar. But as we get started, I'm really interested in getting to know how you are thinking about this webinar as you set it up for us. This is a webinar about discerning where to place our focus and our energies in this critical moment in addressing the climate crisis. And for me, that's a question that's both strategic in nature, but also spiritual in nature, because we're talking about how things that relate to our deepest commitments when it comes to our values and how we want to see those lived out into this world. And so what are your thoughts as we think about our hope and our faith and our courage and where to direct that in this moment?
Yeah, Brooks, I'm glad you asked. And thank you all for being with us. Let me say, I'm not only glad that I've got these guests, but I'm glad that I can count some of these guests as family, not just friends, but family. So I am grateful that I'm looking at some of my family members right now. Listen, as we set this up and really start thinking about how we place our energies, I think that's where we really want to hone in at. Where do we place our energies and expanding how we think about our faith? I'm in particular talking to our community of faith who would tune in right now and hoping that those who aren't are on standby, because I want to connect the two. We've got to expand the way that we think through our faith. Our faith is to connect us to the world, not to separate us from it, but to be a light in it, to be salt and light in it. And the only way we can do that, the only way we can be influential is by getting involved. What we're doing today is really discerning, where do we get involved? Where do we maximize our impact? And we've got some excellent experts that are here today that will break down to us and help us to discern, where do we place our energies? Where is it that we want to put our energy as communities of faith? And so we've got those who are on the panel who will talk to us about the networks that they're involved in, or even in Keya's case, the networks that she manages and leads for us. We can talk to Jean about some of the things from Center for Biological Diversity and so many others. But the most important thing that I need you to hear right now is there are places for us to get involved. We don't have to reinvent the wheel when the wheel already exists. We just have to get behind and help to push it. And so here's what we're doing today. We're looking for ways that we can put our energy into getting involved and making a difference. Our faith is a lived experience, and so we want to live out our faith by helping others. I'm so looking forward to this conversation and looking forward to being with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I know a lot of us right now are thinking, all right, I'm jumping right in there with Michael to get behind that wheel. So thank you for those inspiring words as we get focused and ready for this panel discussion we're about to have. So let me introduce our three panelists in the order that they'll be speaking. First up, we have Keya Chatterjee, who is the Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Action Network. She is the author of the book, The Zero Footprint Baby, How to Save the Planet While Raising a Healthy Baby. I wish I had that one when I was having our first couple of babies. And then, although I should give credit to my wife on that one. But Keya's commentary on climate change policy and sustainability issues has been quoted in dozens of media outlets, including the New York Times, Fox News, the Washington Post, NBC Nightly News. She serves on the boards of numerous organizations, including the Sunrise Movement and the Evergreen Action. Up next, we'll then have Miranda Ehrlich, who is the Federal Field Director for the Sierra Club, where she focuses on making the connection between federal policy opportunities and grassroots organizers and activists across the country. Currently, she is based in Washington, D.C. Previously, she worked for the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign in Madison, Wisconsin. In her free time, Miranda enjoys foraging for wild edible plants. In fact, she has a helpful video online entitled Beginner's Mushroom Foraging in Wisconsin. I'm waiting for the Ohio version. Looking forward to it. And then finally, we will have Jean Su, who is the Energy Justice Program Director and Staff Attorney at the Center for Biological Diversity. Her program work is dedicated to bringing about a clean, democratic energy future. In just the past week, she has been quoted in news outlets such as The Guardian and Politico. She has recently been a thought leader in assessing what executive actions the Biden administration can take on climate. She serves on the boards of the Climate Action Network International and Sustain US. So we are delighted to have each of them here today. Keya, if you could get us started.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm just so honored to be with this crew of people and everyone in the audience today. And I can't wait to learn some more about foraging in DC too. So all kinds of benefits of being here today. So I want to just take 10 steps back in answering this question of where to focus attention and what's going on, and just be really honest that, we were talking about this even before you all joined us as speakers. Jean asked us just how we were all doing, and just be honest and take a moment to say that things are really hard right now. And, sometimes it feels like things are falling apart. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that that's real, that the climate crisis is here. On top of that, we have, elements of society that are really fraying with gun violence, and just, incredible displays of ugliness. And that's hard to deal with. And none of it is really accidental. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, whether it's the shooting in Buffalo or the failure on gun violence or the failure to deal with the climate crisis, this is all rooted in a system of white supremacy that we just haven't yet had the power to dismantle. And ultimately, to deal with all of these issues, where our energy needs to go is systemic change that dismantles that system. And a few examples on climate I'll talk about. One is there's a big piece of climate legislation, and a big part of it is climate, called Build Back Better, that was moving through the Congress through something called a reconciliation process, which meant that it only needed 50 votes. And people looked at the number of senators and they said, oh, well, there are 50 Democrats, so there's a 50-50 Senate. Let's try and pass this thing. And it passed through the House. There's a lot of drama there, but I won't get into all that. It passed through the House, and here we are. And of course, we don't have a 50-50 Senate. And in particular, I want to highlight that Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia is actually in charge of energy and climate policy in the Senate. This is a person who earns 4 times as much income from a coal company relative to what he earns from his job as a United States Senator. If we think for a second that somebody is going to take a vote that is that far against their financial and personal interests. This isn't about representing the state of West Virginia. This is about representing Senator Joe Manchin. And I think it's important to recognize that why this has been so hard is because we don't have proper ethics standards in the Senate. And be honest that it's also this hard because the Senate was set up. It was set up so it's not one vote, one person. It's set up so it's one vote per block of land, no matter who's on that land and how many people are on that land. That is white supremacy. That system was set up so that white, male, land-owning, human being-owning people had maximal power. And that is a system that is never going to deliver justice for us. So ultimately, we have to be arguing for these systemic changes. I'm going to move over to the building across the street from the Capitol where those folks work and talk for a minute about the Supreme Court. And what is happening in the Supreme Court right now is just a set of decisions that do not represent what the people of this country want or a move towards justice. These are decisions that are moving us away from justice. There's a particular case that people are not as familiar with called West Virginia versus EPA. There are multiple states in that case, not just West Virginia, but this is a case that's going to be decided in the coming weeks. And it has the potential to really, really limit what government can do to deal with the climate crisis. What the Supreme Court is trying to argue from what we could hear in the oral arguments was that, in fact, when Congress passes a law, unless it says really explicitly exactly what needs to be done, we're not allowed to do anything about it. That's absurd. We wouldn't have had Social Security. We wouldn't have any of the big programs we had today if that was the decisions the courts were making. But the courts are making these decisions. It's not an accident. It is because for decades, a very extremist right-wing agenda made sure that we were putting in justices into the Supreme Court that would turn back all of these gains that we were making. We have a sitting Supreme Court justice right now whose wife actively was arguing for a coup. And nobody's doing anything about it. And I'm raising this because I think that one of the things we must focus our attention on as people who care deeply about justice, as people who care for each other, as people who want a community, a society where we take care of each other, we have to work towards systemic reforms. Things like getting rid of the Electoral College, ethics reform in the Senate. And when these bad decisions happen, we have to make it clear that that's not okay. And not only to the Democrats whose votes we've been working on, like Senator Joe Manchin and Sinema, but also to every Republican senator who has on their hands they are the ones who put these Supreme Court justices in place. This is on them as these decisions happen. They are the climate deniers not voting for climate action in the Senate, and they are the ones making sure that we are rolling back justices that we have secured already in this country. And so as we talk about like specific things we can do, which are incredibly important right now, like we can still get, climate legislation done. We can get Biden to do things. We also need to be working in ways that help people understand these bigger systems that are in play and how specifically coal, oil, gas, utilities, these companies have bought our democracy, have created injustices in a system that was built on injustices. And it's people like us who are going to come in and say, that's not okay. And I'm going to end with the good news, which is that we know from all these studies all around the world that it just takes 3.5% of any population to rise up and engage in direct action in order to win. We are not there yet, but it is not that hard. And it starts with I don't know how many hundreds of people who are on this call right now. We only need to get to 11 million. And I guess that's my call to everyone on what to focus on. Do the short-term things that build and build and build so that we have enough people ready to say like, no, no justice, no peace. That means me, that means my people. And that means we're not going to participate in this system unless it's bringing us justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated and resonated with your drawing the short term to the need for the systemic change. And we'll now transition to Miranda.
Thank you so much, Reverend Brooks. And thank you also so much, Keya, for putting so well just the need for systemic change, for big picture transformational change. I'm going to talk a little bit about some near-term steps that we can take, some things we can push the administration on, but just really want to emphasize and hold to that larger picture here as we think about that. So a little bit about me, as Reverend Brooks mentioned, Miranda Ehrlich, Sierra Club's Federal Field Director. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based on occupied Piscataway land in Washington, D.C. now, but I actually grew up in the Midwest, as I see many of you in the chat are coming in from today. And I began my organizing journey in Wisconsin, fighting a coal plant that was polluting the air and water of nearby communities. And I will always remember seeing how the coal dust and the coal pollution from that plant blanketed every surface nearby, not just homes and cars, and of course the air that everyone in the community was breathing, but even the local playground. You could literally run your hand down the slide at the playground and turn it over, and it would just be covered in this black, sooty dust pollution. You could literally see the pollution. And at the time, our local coalition of community organizers or organizations and neighbors came together to try to independently monitor the air quality, to try to hold the utility company accountable. But it was expensive, and it was really challenging for a lot of reasons for us to try to take that on. And one of the reason I bring that up is because one of the reasons I am so passionate about organizing for change at the federal level is because the federal government has the power and the resources to hold polluters accountable, so that the burden isn't being placed all on the shoulders of the people who are most impacted. And moreover, if we make change at the federal level, that can have cascading effects rather than, instead of just fixing the problem in one community. Theoretically, we can change things across the board, or at least make the conditions easier for folks on the ground who are intimately involved in these fights to win, make it easier for folks to win. And so those are just a couple of reasons why I'm excited to think about what are some of the potential things we can do at the federal level to bring about change at the very local level. So as Keya mentioned, we still have an opportunity to pass federal legislation through reconciliation to tackle some of these interlocking crises that we face. And I also really think it's important, recognizing the limitations of what Congress is going to do in this system, but also not letting them off the hook, right? Our communities and our planet urgently need investments in transitioning to clean energy, reducing pollution, cutting costs for working families, creating good jobs, promoting environmental justice. And it's hard to overstate how impactful this legislation could be on many issues that we care about across the movement. And we have to make sure Congress knows that they have to finish the job. It's not acceptable for them to go home and do nothing. And so I think it's important for us to let our legislators know that we're still watching and we need them to act. I encourage all of you to call your legislators, especially your senators. It's okay to call repeatedly. Back when I was living in Wisconsin, I probably called Ron Johnson's office like 3 or 4 times a week, as well as Senator Baldwin. And we want to make sure that they're still hearing from us. And if you live in a place like I do now that doesn't have a senator, talk to your friends and family who do have those representatives and ask them to make calls. There's lots of ways to get involved, but it's really important that we keep the pressure on while also holding to that bigger picture of what we're fighting for. And while we continue to advocate for Congress to act, the truth is that the Biden administration has its own responsibility and imperative to advance justice while reducing air pollution to create a more livable future. They have the power to take action now to make some of these changes. Over the next year, the EPA will take comments from the public on a slew of new proposals to cut pollution from dirty power plants, oil and gas drilling, and cars and trucks. These proposals include tightening emission standards for methane, dangerous smog, and soot pollution. A new study from the University of Wisconsin-Madison recently found that eliminating fine particulate air pollution from fossil fuels would save about 50,000 lives per year. Let's sit with that number for a moment. 50,000 lives per year. That's unacceptable. That's atrocious, and we can do better. Moreover, many studies have repeatedly shown that it is people of color, it is communities of color that are disproportionately exposed to and harmed by this type of pollution. Reducing air pollution is not just a public health issue, it's an environmental justice issue, it's an issue of environmental racism. The good news is that there is something we can do about this right now. The EPA is expected to release a proposed rule to strengthen protections against fine particulate pollution under the Clean Air Act later this summer. Unfortunately, big polluters are also closely watching the EPA, and they're exerting all of their insider power. Their goal to make these rules as weak as possible to give them the ability to keep polluting and make more profit. But we know that the Biden administration is listening, and the president needs the public support to set the strongest standards possible. And we need to keep the pressure up. The more pressure we put on them through written comments, through public hearings, through letters to the editor, every way you can think of to make your voice heard, it makes a difference. And it's more likely if we speak up that our government officials will enact the policies we need to meet the scale of the climate crisis, the urgency of racial justice, and to improve the health of our neighbors and communities. So thank you so much. And I will turn it over back to Reverend Brooks.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate those remarks. And now we will transition to Jean.
Great. I always feel awkward on these calls because you just want to applaud everybody and say, yes, that was awesome. So I'm just doing that for Keya and Miranda and everybody else. Thank you, both Revs. Thank you so much for having us. And sending love to everybody. I know that my eyes are getting red all the time because of the heartbreak that is happening right now in the country. So I just want to echo what Keya was saying before and hope that everybody is staying as safe as possible. And here we go. So we got to keep moving and keep having hope. And I am here to deliver some really fantastic news. We actually have a ray of hope, and it happened on Monday. So Keya and Miranda have been talking a lot about federal legislation, and that is awesome, and it keeps going, and we're gonna somehow get across the finish line with Joe Manchin. It's gonna happen. So everybody, let's get ready. That's about to come. At the same time, as we've all been pushing for this great legislation, we've also been pushing for the Biden administration to really use executive muscles that they have, that they've refused to use until Monday. So this past Monday, we got fantastic news that the Biden administration is using the Defense Production Act to manufacture solar panels, heat pumps, insulation, and other key renewable energy technologies to speed our transition to renewable energy. I was proud to be part of the team that put in the blueprint for this plan. And we emphasized that there needs to be a ton of justice elements in this plan. And the Biden administration said, yes, that's what they're going to do. So here's how this whole thing works. So this statute is a Cold War statute, and it's actually always been traditionally used for wartime purposes. So during the Korean War, during the New Deal era, that was the time when the president called upon all the companies in the country and said, hey, we need to make tanks, we need to make grenades, we need to make guns, and I'm commanding you to do that, and that's it. And we got to step forward and do it. So those have all been for wartime purposes. What this is doing now is using this for peaceful purposes. The Biden administration has designated key renewable energy technologies that are necessary to fight climate change that we are not making in the country right now, that we're shipping from abroad. And unfortunately, many of those products are potentially made by slave labor in China with the Uyghur peoples. So we absolutely do not stand for slave labor anywhere, not only in China, but in the United States. So let's just be clear about that. So he's pulled this lever, and how it's going to work is that he's going to work with certain manufacturers in the country to start making these materials, but the justice elements are in there as well. So one of the things that we've urged him to do, and he's going to do it, is that for all these different financial grants and proposals that they're giving to these companies to make, those are going to be tied to high labor standards, whether it's union labor, or good paying jobs, whatever it is and whatever it takes, it's going to be tied to good labor practices. So that's like number one, ding, ding, ding. And make the job generation that we need in this country and focus the manufacturing in places that have been economically blighted and that need that job generation, who are suffering right now in the economy. So that's one justice, big part of that picture. The second part that's dear to my heart is we worked with our environmental justice allies to identify where these materials should be allocated. So once they're made, the Defense Production Act allows the government to actually allocate these materials where they're needed most first. And where that is in this country are environmental justice communities first, especially those who are blighted by climate disaster and by the incredible fossil fuel racism that we've seen in this country. We need to get these folks the insulation, the weatherization for their houses, and then pair that with the solar panels and the batteries that they need to withstand hurricanes, wildfires, and all the climate disasters that have hit them repeatedly. And so we're super excited to be working with the administration on crafting these plans and bringing everybody to the table. So not only industry, but labor and environmental justice leaders first. So that was a huge ray of sunshine on Monday. And we got just a ton of our environmental justice allies, we're so excited. And they said for the first time, one person said to me that they felt for the first time hope in a really long time, especially since the Biden administration started. So I just want to share that awesome news with everyone. And that's just the beginning of what we hope will be significant progress on all of these different elements to fight climate, to fight racism, and to fight unfair labor practices. We need to turn this DPA piece into greater executive action on stopping fossil fuels once and for all, stopping new permits for fossil fuel infrastructure, and reforming our utilities so that everybody gets off decentralized dirty energy and really have ownership over clean and resilient energy for everybody. So these are all steps, and I'll put in some action alerts that we have. There's tons to do, and so grateful to be with you all here to share and celebrate that. And on we go.
Thank you so much, Jean. And I can see there's lots of questions percolating in the audience. Michael, why don't you give us the first question?
Absolutely. Thank you all so very much for your presentation. First question, how can we know the marginalized populations will have access as they often have minimal voice? Disaster relief is often channeled to the rich. Anyone can go in. I almost jumped into that pool, but any one of y'all can go in and grab that one.
Rev, do you want to go first?
No. I'm hosting, so we gonna talk, but let me let y'all talk. So why don't you go first, Jean?
Okay, cool. So there's a couple of things that need to be done on that front. So one thing in the Defense Production Act scenario, where we're actually creating the panels and then allocating those, one huge part of that is we're in the planning phase right now where we are getting environmental justice leaders to that table so that they can actually plan where this needs to be going. And that is the critical part, that the stakeholders are at the table and they actually have the voice and can be and can make that happen. So that's one component of it. The other component, of course, is that FEMA is a severely racist organization. The Federal Energy Management Agency has been shown to fail to distribute any recovery funds to Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities. They disproportionately give it to white communities. So one thing that, so a couple of things are happening on that front. There's so many of amazing frontline community members fight with FEMA every single day and every hurricane season to get the funding that they need. The other parts that we're trying to support frontline communities with is one, a new legal effort to actually hold FEMA accountable, and basically it's in preparation, but potential litigation against FEMA and suing them, and then for discrimination, and also helping FEMA rebuild in a way that does not perpetuate the fossil fuel industry. So we are working with our friends in Puerto Rico to try to change the FEMA regulations right now so that they do not rebuild with fossil fuels and that they build with renewable and decentralized energy. So those are just a couple of things at the forefront of my mind on that. Others?
All right. I think you covered it pretty well. I'm going to move to a different question. Say I'm a math whiz, and I come at this from a number crunching point of view, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, the subject of this webinar is where do we focus our energy, and so I'm thinking, okay, what is out there right now that's going to reduce CO2 emissions the most, methane emissions the most? Is it at the EPA? Is it with the presidential executive actions? Where and then is that the right way to be thinking about this too? And so both questions. Should the number crunching perspective be the way to go? And then and then how does one parse that out?
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that, the answer is simple in some ways in terms of the numbers, right? Like we know where this pollution is coming from that causes the climate crisis. We know that it comes from the way that we, use electricity, our homes, the way that we get around, et cetera. And we have a lot of the solutions at our fingertips. Like we have this, like we know how to use solar and wind instead of coal and gas. We know we've got heat pumps and instead of gas in our homes. But fundamentally, what prevents us from like going after this, like what's the biggest bite out of it one by one, is simply that like, we know we have a moral obligation. We know exactly how to do this, but the fossil fuel industry is incredibly politically powerful. And so I often, when I think about number crunching, I come back to that 3.5%. Like, I think we really need to get serious about quantifying how many people we have ready to take part in direct action, because the reality is that the things we get done, we must get done immediately. I mean, like, and I'm a person who does do everything in my personal life. Like I don't use heat or air conditioning. I don't have a car. I try not to fly. But and I push for those policies at the EPA, the regulation of power plants, the everything Biden can do. But I also feel like we're in a situation where the Supreme Court can and looks like they will take back our ability to do these things. So if we just go after the pollution numbers, if we just think of this from like this is about greenhouse gas emissions, we'll ultimately lose. We also have to think about it as how do we change our power in terms of like using less, making less pollution, but how do we build our power so that whatever happens, you can only run a country for so long if the people aren't with you. How do we make sure that we are unified in building power and making sure that we're holding people accountable to protecting, equity and justice and life and community and all of those things that we want, and and ultimately moving us towards liberation.
Thanks. I really appreciate that response. Michael, do you want to direct us to the next question?
Yeah. So I guess I will again address this to Keya as well, because I know for a fact that we've had some dealing with Manchin and this whole Build Back Better. I'm going to couple two questions together, actually. So without the Build Back Better Act, where are we looking at getting funding to do all of this work? But even in that, having our Republicans resisting with one of their stated reasons is they're not going to be elected by the constituents who believe in climate change or who are fighting against climate change and fighting against fossil fuel industry, saying that they don't have importance in that. How do we really look at moving this needle on climate, moving this needle on environmental justice, when we've got all these contributing factors that are going against us, and the one policy that would have actually gave us some hope and some help has been difficult to get past. How do we get past? Where do we find the hope in all of this? I guess is the best question. And Keya, if you'll answer that, and please let Miranda, because I hadn't heard from Miranda. I would love to hear from you.
Thanks, Rev. I think that, like I think of my grandparents were part of the struggle for Indian independence in India. And I think of them in moments like this because I think it's important to realize that like when they were going up against the British Army and the British Navy and they had no weapons, they had no, there was no reason to believe they could win, and they did. And I think it's important for us to remember that ultimately the course of human history has been towards justice, and we have prevailed. And how have we prevailed? Well, luckily that's really well studied, right? We have created these moments where we take on the power structures, they overreach, and even people who are not normally aligned with us become uncomfortable when they watch those things happen, when they watch the Freedom Riders buses be set on fire, when they watched, in the case of India, they watched Gandhi walk to the ocean to make salt and be beat up, have thousands of people, attacked viciously for making salt. When people see that, they move. Our opposition who doesn't care about our lives is such a small percentage of this country. Most people in this country do care about our lives. We cannot give up on them. When they see these injustices, they will realize their values are not aligned with the people who are protecting fossil fuel billionaires. Their values are actually aligned with ours. We just need to be there to put that on display for them. We need to be in regular dialogue, and we need to bring people with us. And if someone asked the 3.5%, what is that? That's the percent of the population that needs to be actively engaged in direct action. Historically speaking, that if you have that many people, you will always prevail. You will always win over the middle of the country who are disengaged if you have that many people who are really willing to put their bodies in the line and show people the enormous injustice, because people are living their lives, they just don't see it. We can show it to them. We have the ability to do that.
Thank you. Yes, and I just wholeheartedly agree with everything that Keya just said. And I want to just add on to that by saying, I think you asked, where can we find hope in all of this, which I think is a really good question. And I believe it's in thinking about movement building for the long haul. It's about building up our power. It's about bringing in more people. It's about thinking for the long term, so that when we have a situation like this, right, let's build back better. And, there is still an opportunity. I want to emphasize that, but also it was really disappointing last year. This was something I've been working on for a year, and it was like, okay, timeline's moving back a month. Okay, the timeline's moving back another month. And we have this huge, amazing group of activists who've been, organizing lobby visits for August recess and actions and putting the pressure on. And then it's just going back and back. And then, there's nothing. And that is infuriating and so frustrating. And I think for me, one of the biggest things I learned from this experience is that this is really a long-term fight, and sometimes you win and sometimes you don't, but the important thing is to keep your eye on what that vision is for the long haul and what we're building together. And in the process of organizing, we want to be bringing folks in and building community. And I see that here on this webinar today, right? This is about building community and working together and building those relationships as that foundation for everything we do. So it's not like we just totally fight, work, and then we burn ourselves out and we say, never again, I'm done, I'm leaving the movement, right? That's when we lose. That's when we really lose, right? But I feel like through this, at least from speaking from the Sierra Club standpoint, we brought in thousands of new activists who had not taken action with us before, and we're excited to learn how to, lobby their member of Congress or take other actions around this. And it's like, that's a whole cohort of new folks who now are more engaged and are going to stick with us for the next fight and as we build towards that 3.5% and beyond. So yeah, that's where I find my hope, is just in the people that are the foundation of all of this work.
Thanks, Miranda. I'm actually going to possibly stick with you for a moment here because I think one of the questions is appropriate to you since you referenced your time spent calling members of Congress back in Wisconsin. So the question from the audience is, how do we address the resistance of Republican senators to passing legislation based on their often stated reason that I will not be reelected by their constituents? Re-election seems to be a primary reason for refusing to enact legislation.
Yes, and that's a good question. And I think a couple of thoughts here. One is that going back to sort of what Keya was saying at the very beginning, thinking about systemic change and the structures we have and who's in power and why, I think in a lot of cases, especially on something like it's hard, it's going to be hard to move a lot of these people. And some of it is about their reelection, but I think for a lot of them, it's also about ideology too. And there's a number of reasons why these Republicans are not willing to act. And so just to name that up front. And I still think it's really important to organize. If you live in a place where you have a Republican, like with me dealing with Ron Johnson all the time, absolutely I was calling his office, because the thing is, when we say like, those people are a lost cause and they're never going to side with us, like that might be true, but that doesn't mean we still shouldn't make them hold them accountable for those terrible, terrible, terrible decisions. And the thing is, like, yeah, so in doing that, and especially by making it public and just articulating why they're on the wrong side, why what they're upholding is so harmful, whatever stances they're upholding, by making that public, then we start to also persuade those folks in the middle who might not be with us yet, but also might be more appalled at what they're doing or their failure to act. And we may start to persuade some of their constituents that this isn't who they want representing them. And so I think it is just as important, if not more, it's incredibly important to organize in places that are represented by Republicans who might be saying, I can't vote for this because my constituents think X. Well, let's out-organize them, right? Let's make that case. Let's force them to make that case. Let's force them to be on the defensive and say why they're not going to pass climate legislation. And I think then the truth starts to come out and we start to make some progress.
Now, bear along with me with this particular question because it's rather long, but Keya, this is one that I think would be real good for you because of our emphasis on building and deepening relationships within USCAN. It says, I am wondering about a different arena from research, eco-psychology, and crisis trauma, like parents and families of gun violence and their families, that sustainable action is based in the personal meaning, personal connection, personal experience. So all these external actions we are asking people, congregations to do, need to be more fully based in meaningful nature connection experience. How do we help individuals in our churches have and regularly cultivate personal deep nature connection so that the actions are more sustainable, long-lasting, and resilient against things like despair, frustration, having no hope? If we want all these actions, we need people deeply connected and resilient. That is through direct nature connection, through experience, shifts in language, shifts even in theology, and those kind of communal experiences consistently. I'm hoping you heard that. Heard the question there.
I did.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the thing about a moment like the one we're in where things are falling apart is that things happen really fast, and they can happen really fast in bad ways. Like we can go to war, and they can happen really fast in good ways. Like we can suddenly be using the Defense Production Act for solar and heat pumps. And I think the ability for us to take advantage of those things moving fast relies on our wholeness and our sense of community. and the amount to which we actually have the headspace to really think about the world we want, where we are, and how we get there. And so much of our ability to do that really has to do with not self-care, but community care, not just as individuals being tied to nature, but as community being tied to nature, and feeling that interconnectedness with each other is what allows us to tend to our wholeness and our wellness as a community, which is what allows us ultimately to go big in these moments that fall apart. So for me, these things are very interrelated. I don't know if the question was really a question or an assertion. If it's an assertion, I'd say amen. I agree. Like that, we got to take care of ourselves. We got to be in community, because that's how we move. No one can get anything done alone. You also don't need to have everybody in the world with you in order to move, but you got to have some people with you. And you're not going to do that unless you really are grounded, yourself and why you're taking actions, and unless you've really kind of made the space and feel that personal love and connection to others and to nature.
Thanks for that response. I want to shift to a question for Jean. Jean, let's say that a month from now, things have gone as good as we could have possibly hoped with Congress, and then we're thinking about some of the things that you talked about in terms of executive actions. So I'm thinking, okay, if I'm in Iowa or Florida or Virginia, what can I be doing that's going to be an action that's going to relate to helping to bring about the next executive action that you would like to see? How do we go from where we are locally to something that's kind of at the top federal level there?
Yeah. So we've been dissecting kind of how we were able to win this past Monday. And in a lot of ways, this call and this urgency came from so many different voices across the country. So we talked to our veterans, and our veterans are all over the country. They actually believe in this idea that climate change is a national defense issue. And so they came and basically organized and came from all different parts of the country, Republican, Democrat states, and did LTEs, op-eds, huge sign-on letters, and lobbied on Congress. The same happened with elected officials. We got 500 elected officials to come together, make it to DC, organize around this. Our environmental justice partners did the same. Our labor partners did the same. Solar industry people. So it kind of is, and it all funneled up. Congress, we helped Cori Bush and Representative Jason Crow, who's a moderate from Colorado. They came together and changed that blueprint into legislation. So it came from Congress, and Congress was also asking. So it's really all these different people from everywhere can actually funnel up. And in those LTEs and op-eds, they talked about what they needed in their community and why it was important for them to get solar and all of these different renewable technologies right now to escape fossil fuels. So I think we just need to keep going. And the way we can help with more executive action, particularly on fossil fuel infrastructure, is to make that same call and that same diversity of voices from all over the country to funnel it up to the White House. And I think it is really important that, we may only have 2 years left with the Biden administration. We don't know, right? It's anybody's guess. But the polling suggests that Trump may be in power in 2 years. And I think, what the Biden administration can do in these next 2 years is move as fast as possible. And so we at the same time that we're lobbying for BBBA, we also need to keep lobbying for executive action and have everybody's voices come out for that.
Thanks. Great answer. I really appreciate that. Michael, you have something for us?
Yeah, I'm looking here, and I was just at a website looking. I put in top 10 Christian denominations, and Brooks, I was really alarmed at the amount of congregants that we claim to have. And looking at the 3.5, we actually have the 3.5 sitting in the Christian denomination in itself. we represent a population that needs to be energized and that needs to be acted. I'm wondering, and I guess we all need to have this conversation real quick, including you, Brooke. Why is it that we can't get those populations that aren't naturally engaged but should be engaged? What is it that we can do to energize? What has to happen for us to get these people energized or us energized to be able to take action? And that was a question about retirees being energized, but then I looked and I said, hell, we got all the numbers right here in the church. Why aren't we doing more? So I guess what is it? And I'm asking this from everybody, that including you, Rev. What is it that we can do to get folks involved? What can we do to get them amped up and get them going? Russ Thaddeus, you jump in too. You up there?
Well, I would like to just plug in. I'm Thaddeus. I was off screen for a while, but I work in our Office of Public Policy and Advocacy. And I've been really trying to restrain myself from jumping in and answering like a lot of these questions, because if you stay on for the previous action alerts and other sessions or the one following after this, every month I'm coming at you with, a new law, a new action, a new thing that you could be quickly messaging. We do all the messaging and everything for you. You just have to hit a button and already all of your representatives and your senators are contacted. But what we need to do is really start, I feel like a lot of times we take all the burden just on our own individual shoulders. And when we feel like we alone can't do something, or we feel like, oh, well, I voted for this person and they lost the election, or I sent in a letter and then the thing that I wanted didn't happen. Well, I think we give up too quickly. What we need to do is that we need to keep coming back at them when they don't do what we want them to do. In another session, I said, even when they do something that we do want them to do, we need to give them kudos for that, give them support, let them know that that was meaningful as well. We have to keep that communication and that chain of accountability with our representatives, no matter if we voted for them or we didn't vote for them. They're representing everyone in their district, not just their base. So we have to keep that in mind. And we have to be pressing each other, having conversations with each other, have conversations in your congregations. A lot of our congregations don't want to have political conversations. They think it's not their place. And so they stay quiet and they keep that off the table, but it very much is our place. Scripture is full of instances of God calling the people to hold their leaders to account, even in situations where they don't have democracies like we do. So I think that's one thing that we need to do. We need to we need to step up our own individual games and trying to persevere in the face of struggle, but know that we can get support from each other when we do things collectively together, and to keep that in mind.
Yeah, Michael, I'm just gonna maybe fine tune your question just for to get another response from Keya, if we can slip it in here, which is to say, when I heard Keya talk about the 3.5, I thought those are our prophets out there, right? They're the ones that are stepping out and activating the rest of us, right? And so, Keya, can you unpack for us when you talk about direct action? Well, can you just unpack that? And if someone is thinking, I'm not going to chain myself to the front of the White House gate, where is that person, right? And so help us unpack that.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought too until I did it. It's a little addictive, I will say. I think I did not imagine in my first job when I was working at NASA on climate science that I would end up chained to something at the White House, but I did. I mean, I think honestly, we are calling on people to take sacrifice. We are calling on people to take some risk, particularly people who have some privilege and have some privilege within how they will be treated by police. I think it's really important that we begin to stand up, and yeah, that does mean putting our bodies between, sometimes in front of fossil fuel infrastructure. It means, we use a term called disruptive humanitarianism. Sometimes you have to disrupt the system, but at the same time, we should be helping people. So sometimes you need to block a street, but in order to make your point, to make it so that, okay, we're not going to let these legislators go home if they're not doing their jobs, and you have to block a street. But let's make sure that if we're doing that we are creating a community of joy around us. We got some hopscotch, some double dutch. We are creating a sense of community. We're bringing something beautiful to the community. We're feeding people. We're guerrilla gardening. Like, it doesn't matter at some point whether it's private land or public land. People need food. These are things we can do to disrupt the system. And there's a whole range of things. So no, not everyone is going to very slowly go along this process and chain themselves to things the way in the same journey that I took. But there are it's also withholding of things. So there are times when we are asking, we're going to need to say to people, like, we need to withhold our consent. That means we need people to not go to work. That means we need people to not pay their taxes. We are in a situation where, the attacks on our democracy have been so extreme that we're headed in a dangerous direction. So we do need people to get mentally prepared and get trained in nonviolent direct action, that action that we can take that says, like, I will not put up with this anymore. Me and my community, we're not going to be okay. And we know that it works because we saw the Freedom Riders. We know the lunch counter sit-ins worked. We know time after time again, whether it's, taking down Jim Crow in this country, taking out apartheid in South Africa, beating back colonialism all over the world. We know that this works. We also know that it's a lot to ask of people, but there is a lot at stake right now.
Thank you so much for that response. That was very helpful. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, but we do invite people to stick around after the top of the hour to join Thaddeus as we look at the latest action alerts and get the latest updates from him. And so before we do that, though, a big thank you to all of our panelists. You've been tremendous. This webinar is going to live on because it's just so impactful, the things that you have had to say, so much to go back to and to think about, and helping us discern how to take action now. So thank you to all of you. Reverend Michael Malcolm, do you have any final words before we transition to Thaddeus?
I did. I don't know if it showed or not, I put the picture of Keya being chained up in the chat. So if y'all wanted to see it. But listen, I told y'all, this family, we get in good trouble together all the time, y'all. This work for me is ministry. It's not just me going and me doing marches. It's not just me going and me doing speeches. It's me going and me doing ministry. When I spend time with, deepening those relationships, it's ministry. When I'm out in the street and I'm pumping my fist like this and waving my hands like I just don't care, it's me doing ministry. When I'm out in the streets and I'm saying words that you wouldn't normally like for a preacher to say, I'm doing ministry. And it's simply ministry for us to get out here and show that we care. That's what it's all about. It's really about us showing that we care. We not only care for the community, our cosmos, but we also care for the community as well. We not only care for planet, but we care for people. And we call out polluters. Prophecy was not just about giving good tidings. It was about calling out what was happening in community. We've got to get back to being prophets, y'all. It doesn't always look good. It's not always pretty, but it's always necessary. We are the salt and the light. I need you always to remember that. We are the salt and the light. That means we have influence. We shine in darkness, and we give that flavor. I need some folks out there that's going to help me to give some flavor and to shine a light, to stick around so you can help us to move into action. Thank you.